Good evening, friends. Welcome to Friday once again. I'm back with another tale from my book Dark Fragments, and a little surprise for you at the end. Now it's time to grab a snack, dim the lights, and let me take you into the night with a story I call City Underground. The doctor said it happened a year ago, but it seems like only yesterday. I wonder how it is that a memory from long ago can be so vivid, and yet I usually can't remember what I had for lunch the day before. There are two versions of the story that led to my sitting here with pen and paper, the doctor's and my own. The doctor says I fell into a hole and banged my head. As a result of this accident, I was comatose for 11 and a half months, during which I must have experienced very realistic dream states that imprinted as memories of events, and not as the dreams he insists they are. I've been out of the coma for nearly 2 weeks now, and while my physical therapy is going well, there is concern over my confusion of events. The doctors told me to go back as far as I can remember and write everything down so it might make sense to me. Before I begin rehashing old memories, there are several points I'd like to consider. First, sleep studies have shown that we only dream in REM sleep. Also, by means of EEG, or electroencephalograph, scientists have proven that in a coma, it's a much deeper state of unconsciousness than REM sleep. If I was comatose, how could I dream? Second, when I awoke from the coma, I was attended by my girlfriend. Before the nurses could shoo her out, she commented on how blessed I was to survive 3 days lying in a ditch unconscious in November without succumbing to hypothermia before they found me. Depending on where you live, this may seem reasonable, but here in Michigan, it's virtually impossible. The days in November are fairly mild, but the nights can get downright Arctic with the breeze blowing in off of Lake Michigan. I live in St. Joseph, Michigan, but I go to Lakeshore Junior High in Stevensville. Both towns are split north to south by the Red Arrow Highway, which meanders along the coast of Lake Michigan parallel to I-94 from Michigan City, Indiana. Right on the northwest corner of the intersection of Glenlord Road and Red Arrow Highway, there's a grocery store. Next to this, there's a white 2-story house with light pink trim. My girlfriend calls it Titty Pink, where I live with my family. At the front of the house, to the left side of the entrance door, there are 2 large multi-pane windows with the curtains pushed up tight against them from the bunk beds my brother and I share. The last night I remember of October, it was snowing. I was lying on the top bunk, looking out through the crack in the curtains, watching the snow fall. It was a heavy snow, and I felt for sure I wouldn't have to go to school the next day because of the way the snow was piling up on the highway. Around midnight, a city plow barreled by and cleared the street of snow, but it was falling so fast that it covered it again in minutes. As I fell asleep, my last thought was that tomorrow would be a good day to hunt pheasant along the edge of the nearby peach orchard, as the snow would drive the birds out of the tall grass and into the thick pines bordering it. I awoke to the screeching of my mother telling me that I only had 10 minutes before the bus arrived and I'd better get a move on or plan on walking to school. "Calm down, Ma," I grumbled back, rolling over. "I was up late watching the snow fall, and I know there ain't no school today." "You better think again," she called from the kitchen. "We were at the tail end of the storm. I looked up the street when I went out to get the paper, and there's no snow past a half-mile away. Your school isn't listed on the television as one of the closures either." That was just my luck. Here I was planning on hunting a few pheasant, and the snow couldn't cooperate. I rolled off my bunk, got dressed, and went into the kitchen to grab some toast. Looking at the clock, I knew the bus should be pulling up out front any minute, so I headed out. Opening the front door, I saw the bus pulling away and ran to catch it, only to watch as it faded away from me through the intersection. Damn, couldn't even get lucky and have the stoplight delay it. Well, this wouldn't be the first time I had to walk to school. The walk to school on this day was much like any other day. I followed Red Arrow Highway south about a mile, and then veered to the left on a side street which ran away at about a 35-degree angle to the east. This road carried me right into downtown Stevensville, where I would turn left again and head right on down the main drag past the public library and the high school to the junior high. The sun had come out, and it was nice enough to make me remember the warmer weather that had just departed. I longed for the bright new days of spring when I could return to the beaches of Lake Michigan. As I came past the last of the shopping centers and started down the hill, I looked at the stream that ran across under the road. Surprisingly, it was not yet frozen over. One of my favorite pastimes on nice days when I had to make this walk was to stop at the stream and study the fish and crawdads that lived in the deeper pools. I climbed down the shallow embankment and looked into the first deep pool. There at the bottom, a crawdad was busy munching on a minnow, while the other minnows swam in tight circles around him as if to protest the demise of their brother. On the other side of the road was an even deeper pool, where I knew a bigger crawdad the size of a small lobster lived. I walked over to the big drain pipes which ran under the road and started across to the other side. Although the stream averaged about a foot deep, the water in the pipe was only several inches deep, and by walking spread-legged through the pipe, I could cross under the road without even getting my shoes wet. No dice here. All the fish were gone, and there was no sign of the big crawdad. I jumped the stream to climb up the opposite bank. The bank on the far side was steeper and still wet from the previous night's snow, so I went a bit upstream to where I could pull myself along the exposed roots of a massive oak tree which grew there. At the top, I heard the sound of rushing water and looked back at the stream, but it was only flowing lazily along. I looked around, but there was nothing to account for the sound of rushing water. Then I noticed a hole about 2 feet wide at the base of the oak tree. Leaning over the hole and looking in, I wished I had a flashlight so I could see what was down there. Suddenly, the edge of the hole collapsed and I was falling head first. The fall wasn't very far, maybe 6 feet, but the water was cold, and I gasped when I landed, inhaling a mouthful of water. This began a choking fit as I fought to catch my breath and stay at the surface of the water. When I finally caught my breath, I realized the water was carrying me along swiftly, and it was dark. I panicked and started furiously trying to swim against the current back to where I knew the hole and the light had to be. Before long, I started to be able to see, and figured I must be getting close to the tree because the cavern was getting brighter. Then the current swept me around a bend, out of the cavern and into a very bright cave. Apparently, my swimming had been in vain. I drifted over to a rocky ledge and pulled myself out of the water, where I collapsed on the bank and tried to regain my strength. Lying there, I became aware that the light was coming from tubes in the ceiling. They were fluorescent light fixtures. I sat up and looked around. I must have ended up in a sewer service or something. The cave was about 25 feet across, and looking back to where I'd come in, it dwindled down to about 7 or 8 feet across and 2 feet above the water. I was sitting on the outside radius of a turn. Further downstream, no more than 100 feet, the ledges met in the middle and the stream drove straight down under the floor to disappear in a giant whirlpool. Beyond this point, the cave turned around another bend. I got up and carefully inched along the ledge toward the bend. I had to find a way out, and there was no way I could go back the way I came. As I got closer to the bend and the opening in the floor, my foot slipped and I fell partially into the water. I was much closer to the whirlpool now, and I could feel the water trying to suck me in. I scrambled back up the ledge and continued on toward the bend. At last, the ledge opened out onto a rocky floor, and I could walk steadily. I came around the bend and stopped dead in my tracks. I could not believe what I saw. I was standing on a ledge above an underground city. There below, I could see what looked to be a town right out of the Old West. There was one main street, and at one end was a 2-story building that looked to be a hotel next to a bank. Further up the street, I could see a mercantile and a saloon. The other buildings seemed to be shops or garages, but there was no livery. Not surprising, I thought. Who'd expect to find horses underground? Behind these, across an alley, stood a row of concrete two-story buildings like offices, and at one end of these was a tower. The tower looked like a guard tower from a high-security prison. Inside the tower, I could see two men who seemed to be guarding the town. I quickly looked around and saw that I was in the shadows. No need to fear being seen. I sure didn't want them to know I was here. No one knew of my whereabouts, and I didn't have any idea of what I'd stumbled into. Heck, I didn't even know my whereabout. Looking off to my right, the ledge led slowly down the grade and came out behind the second row of buildings behind me. I cautiously made my way down, staying close to the wall to avoid detection. As I descended, I became aware that the office buildings were actually apartments, and I could see families inside sitting down to breakfast. In one window I saw a little girl looking out, and she waved to me. I looked around, and there was no one there but me. Yes, she was waving at me. But how? I couldn't even see my hand in the shadows, yet she could see me. I crept slowly down into the town and made my way between the buildings to what seemed to be the sheriff's office. As I walked, I noticed that even though I was always headed in the same general direction, my shadow was slowly getting shorter. Looking up, I found that this immense cavern was not lit by tubes, but instead there was what appeared to be one giant sodium arc light way above in the ceiling. Looking to the sides of this light, I could see bars of steel running across the ceiling, and I figured that these must be the lighting tracks used to simulate the movements of the sun. Now that I was within the actual town itself, I made sure to stay in the alleys and shadows. I had done nothing wrong, but I had read enough science fiction to know that people don't generally take kindly to uninvited outsiders. All around me were trees and flowers. Looking across the main street, I could see a building which looked like a courthouse. The courtyard of this building was decorated with a wide array of flowers and fruit trees. All the trees were in full fruit, and the flowers were fully bloomed. I had just passed a doorway when an older gentleman stepped out and asked if I'd had breakfast yet. He looked at me as if he'd known me all my life instead of like the stranger I obviously was. When I told him that I had eaten, he shrugged and said, "Well, see you around. Don't be such a stranger, though. Stop and chat when you have time." The old man must have been a little off his rocker, because here I was a stranger, and he acted as if I was someone he knew. I nodded, waved, and disappeared around the corner as fast as I could. No telling when he was going to realize that I didn't belong here and sound the alarm to his superiors or whoever. I figured the best thing for me to do was to find the parties in authority, explain my situation, and ask for help. I figured that if I was honest, they wouldn't treat me like a trespasser. This town looked like the Old West, and I remember what they did to trespassers in the movies. Continuing on in the direction of the sheriff's office, I was watching my back trail when I ran into a girl about my age. I don't mean I met her, rather, I literally ran into her, spilling her basket of fruit into the dirt. "I'm sorry," I said, hoping the shock would prevent her from seeing a stranger. "Please, let me help you with those." I began to help her pick up the fruit, wiping the dust off on my shirt. Suddenly she stopped and gasped in surprise. I thought my time was up for sure when she leapt up and threw her arms around me. "I'm so happy to see you," she cried. "It took you so long to finally come to me." I was thinking to myself that I either had a twin somewhere down here or all these people were nuts. Didn't they realize I was an outsider? Didn't they care? "Just a minute," I said. "Do you know me?" "Oh, I don't know your name, and I see that you're not of this city. But I'm so glad that you're here." She looked confused. "Aren't you glad to be here?" Now there's a question for you. I was scared straight that I would be accused of trespassing or worse, and I was being welcomed like a long-lost puppy. "Yeah, I guess I'm glad to be here, but I don't know where here is. Don't you care that I'm an outsider and don't belong here?" "No," she looked me in the eye. "It's all right that you're here. You can't leave, so there's no harm you could do." In my mind, I'm thinking that this is one of those cult gathering places. What do you mean I can't leave? Am I a prisoner? She giggled for a few minutes and said, "No, silly. You're free to do as you please as long as you don't hurt anyone or anything, and provided you do your work when assigned." "But I can leave this place," I asked, "or am I trapped here forever?" "But why would you not want to stay?" A pained expression crossed her face. "You could leave this place and return to the outside world, but you could never leave with the knowledge of our existence. So in essence, you could never leave. If you were no longer here, that would mean that your memory of this place was taken from you, and you would not recall ever being here. Therefore, how can you leave someplace you've never been?" "Wait a minute. Take my memories from me?" This was starting to sound like a mix between a sci-fi story and a fairy tale. "Are you trying to say that you would scramble my brains and toss me out into the cold world above?" "We would do no such thing," I was chastened. "We would simply explore your memory synapses and remove any data pertinent to our survival. Come, let me introduce you to the elders." "Wait, what's your name?" I was not about to go off and possibly meet my doom without knowing her name. "Mine's Kevin." "Very nice to meet you, Kevin. My name is Leah." She smiled, and her green eyes seemed to glow. She turned with her basket and went around the corner. "Come along." If I said the town looked like an old west town from the outside, I'm sure you can appreciate my surprise when I saw the inside of the buildings. Instead of rough-hewn lumber, as the exterior suggested, the interior walls seemed to be made of or coated with a type of plastic. Everything was shiny white and clean, like an operating room in a hospital. I felt that I had rode into town with Wyatt Earp and then flew back out with a galactic traveler. Leah led me into the building which I was headed for anyway, and down a long corridor to a large stone door. The stone was polished and felt like warm marble that had been dipped in hot wax. She laid her hand onto the silver panel on the wall, and the door slid aside. Inside, I could see what looked to be an ordinary office with a door marked Elders to one side. Leah approached the secretary, and after a few words, I was ushered in to see the Elders. I was expecting to see a bunch of old men in white robes sitting around a round table with clouds of mist hanging about their heads. Instead, I was greeted by a man in his mid to late 30s. "Well, good morning, young man. I'm Jim Elder, and this is my brother, Randy." He shook my hand fiercely. "What do you think of our little town?" "It's amazing, sir." My gaze went over his shoulder to the television on the filing cabinet. It was showing a channel from up above. He looked in that direction I was staring. "What's the matter? Never seen a TV?" "Oh, yes, sir. I was just wondering how you got the signal down here. I mean, we are underground, and the signal couldn't possibly penetrate the rock above. It won't even go through my bedroom wall without a wire." "Quite bright, aren't you? We have a collecting and retransmitting antenna set up on a house on the outside. Quite simple, really." He looked me up and down. "We could use a thinker like you down here." I took a step back. "I don't really want to stay, sir. I fell into a hole on accident and it landed me here. I was almost killed in the water pool up in the cave above on the ledge, and I'm tired and I want to go home." "Almost killed by a water pool?" He turned to his brother. "Randy, have maintenance check out the feed to the turbines. It seems there's a breach in the aqueduct." I realized then that the turbines he was referring to must be the source of electric power for this underground city. It got me to thinking about where the fresh air came from and why they didn't use this technology to help put a colony on the moon. My mind was racing on 100 different tracks at once, and it must have been too much because the next thing I knew, I was waking up in a bed. Leah was there beside me, holding a damp washcloth, and I could feel the sweat on my forehead. I looked at her questioningly. "You had us worried. Your little swim must have taken a lot out of you." She wiped my face again. "How long was I out?" I felt weak and was still having trouble grasping that I was actually here in this place. 2 days, she smiled. "But you're okay now." 2 days? I exclaimed. "My God, my mother and everyone will be worried sick." I got up and headed for the door. What door, I didn't know, but I knew I had to get out of there. It hadn't occurred to me as yet how I was going to explain my disappearance for 2 days. The door opened, and there stood the elder brothers. "Well, up and moving, are we?" Jim Elder spoke. "Good. After a couple days of good food and rest, you should be ready to take your place in the science building. We've assigned you to research and development. Don't worry about your schooling. We have an excellent staff who will tutor you." Excuse me, sir." I was scared. I don't mean to be rude or make light of what you've done for me, but I gotta get home. My folks are going to be worried sick, and so is my girl." At the last word, I saw Leah flinch. Apparently, she had plans for me too. "Home? Well, yes, we can send you back if you like, but we'd like very much for you to join us." He looked me in the eye. Even as scared as I was, I think he could see the resolve in my eyes. "Just lay back down, and I'll have the doctor come in and prepare you for the return." He left the room. "I do wish you'd reconsider," Leah pleaded with her eyes while she maintained her composure. "If not, then please know that I would always welcome you back." The door opened, and in walked a man dressed as a doctor. "Kevin, I'm Dr. Davidson. I'm going to prepare you for return to the outside. I'm sure you're aware that we cannot allow you to retain any memories of this place." I nodded. "Good. Now I'm going to give you an injection which will make you sleep. Then I will scan your memories with this." He pointed to a machine. "Will it hurt?" I was still unsure of this. "No, of course not. It will simply repolarize the synapses in your memory from the time you fell in the hole up to when you wake up on the outside. Before I do this, I've been instructed to tell you that if you regain your memory of this place on the outside, you are to tell no one. We aren't really worried about the discovery, but rather you would most likely be judged mad and locked up as such. In the event you regain these memories, always know that you are free to return if you can find a way, and you will always be welcome. Are you ready?" I looked at Leah once more and saw a tear on her cheek. I wiped it away as I turned to the doctor and nodded. He pushed a small needle into my arm, and I fell asleep. I awoke to the sound of voices, and when I opened my eyes, my head hurt. Looking up, all I could see was a circle of light and some blurry figures. I looked around and realized I was in the hole at the base of the tree, but it was different. No longer did it lead to the water, but now there was a rock under me, a huge rock like a boulder. As I slipped back into the darkness, my last thought was they had fixed the breach in the aqueduct. The doctor said it happened a year ago, but it seems like only yesterday. I wonder how it is that a memory from long ago can be so vivid, yet I usually can't remember what I had for lunch. If you enjoyed that, please be sure to listen next Friday when I reveal a recently written Part 2 called Return to City Underground, which is to be included in my next book of short stories. Thank you for spending your time with me. Tell me what you think in the comments, and I'll be sure to join the conversation. That's all for now, but I'll be back next Friday with the sequel, so until then, sleep well.